Hi everyone, this is Robert and welcome to IDG Live. Today we are looking at House Dayne, one of the most fascinating, intriguing houses in all of Westeros. And we've been doing a series, we're still doing a series, going through Westeros, trying to look at some of the more intriguing houses um, and or the regions of Westeros. And I did a couple of regions the last couple of weeks and people said, can we slow down a little bit? Can we dig into a few of the houses in a little bit more detail? So I thought that's what we'd do today. Was we'd pause here. We're about to do Dawn, but we'll pause and look at House Dayne in a little bit more detail. As I say, it's one of the more fascinating houses. We've got a lot of questions to get through. What I would do normally is a bit of a history, bit of a background to the house. I think what I will do is I will just quickly add in this, which is the map we usually use, quartermaster.info, hat tip to them, just to give you a quick flavour of the house. One of the oldest houses in all of Westeros. We've got a lot of questions going through the history, so I'm not going to go through all of that in detail now, but just so you know where we're at. Dawn obviously is this bit here at the bottom of the map, the more deserty type. However, House Dayne are the stony Dornish. They're off to the west. Now, if you see the island there at the bottom left of your screen, that is the Arbor. If you sort of head in from that, you'll get to the very bottom of the Reach. But also, if you head right a little while you get this kind of inlet coming in, and there, where you get the river heading the Torrentine River, you get an island called Starfall, and that is the home of House Dayne. So they're, yes, they're Dornish, but they're also in the middle, in an island, in the middle of a river, in the middle of a mountain range. They're kind of cut off, and yet also one of the first places, if you were coming across on boats from elsewhere just to try and find some place to land, one of the first places that you would find. So that's the starting point we have. And let's go to some questions straight away. Talking about Dawn, Carolina Clay saying, "Hey Robert, do you have a theory on the origins of Dawn and what it's actually made of, given its unique appearance?" And Ranamir Mitra also saying, "The old kings of the Torrentine were said to have founded Starfall by tracking a falling star and finding a stone there of magical powers. Could Dawn have been potentially forged from this fallen star?" I'm seeing parallels with Eol, the Dark Elf. This is in Lord of the Rings, the Silmarillion, who forged Anguirel and Anglachel from a fallen meteorite. So, yes, this is the background and history to why House Dayne is where it is. The legend goes way back in the Dawn Age, really, before even we get to the Age of Heroes. The progenitors of House Dayne set off hunting for this shooting star, which landed on an island, the island of Starfall. They eventually found it, and they found this meteorite which had landed, and it was made of this strange magical metal. And from this strange magical metal, they managed to forge a sword called Dawn. Now, they made where it landed into their home. They called it Starfall for obvious reasons, and that was their home from there on. But the house itself can never be dissociated from the sword that was forged at the creation of this house, the sword called Dawn. Now, Dawn does have a distinctive appearance. It is milky white, we're told. Those maesters who've looked at it say it does share quite a few of the characteristics of Valyrian steel, and that it is hard wearing, it is very sharp, it is very light. However, it is not made from Valyrian steel. We often sort of conflate it by saying that this is a Valyrian steel sword. It is not a Valyrian steel sword. This is something different. This is something older, and this is something which is said to be magical. And this sword is held by House Dayne and is passed down from generation to generation. When we think about Valyrian steel swords, it's often the Lord gets to have the Valyrian steel sword, and it's just like whoever happens to be, the chosen one in a particular generation gets it. Some houses, we looked at House Corbray a few months ago. Some houses with their sword, Lady Forlorn, it isn't necessarily the Lord who gets it. If there's like a really good fighter in the family, they can have it, but then it sort of reverts back to by default to the Lord. What we have here with Dawn is a very different system entirely. It isn't just the Lord who gets it. It isn't just a good fighter each generation who gets it. A lot of the time, nobody has the sword Dawn. The sword Dawn can only be claimed by someone deemed worthy of having the sword. Now, worthy seems to include both the element of a good fighter, but also some kind of morally upstanding person. And that person who owns or uses the sword Dawn then gains the title the Sword of the Morning. Now, I'm sure this will come up later, but the language imagery here is very clear. Dawn, morning. Um, these are things which are potentially associated with the end of the long night. And given the fact that this sword was around then, it does lead a lot of people to wonder, is this the original Nightbringer? We will come on to that in a little while, I'm sure. But the Sword Dawn has uh, a history that matches the House Dayne. It has stayed with the house through all of this time. House Dayne has never been overthrown. Nobody else has ever taken the sword. And um, every now and then, when a worthy swordsman comes along, he has the sword of he has Sword Dawn, and he becomes the Sword of the Morning. And he often is deemed to be one of, if not the greatest fighters of his generation. Most recently, we hear about Arthur Dayne. Arthur Dayne, who was in the Kingsguard for Aerys II, quite a legendary Kingsguard, it has to be said there, along with Sir Barristan Selmy and others. And Arthur Dayne was best friends with Rhaegar, and he was also generally acknowledged to be the finest swordsman of his generation. Jaime, when he thinks about him, it's in glowing terms. Jaime is generally considered to be probably one of the greatest swordsmen of his generation. Arthur Dayne, a generation before him, is the person that Jaime looked up to, the person that he thought was way leagues ahead of him. So Arthur Dayne is held up as being not just a great swordsman, but also a really great person because he was the Sword of the Morning. So, what is it made of? Carolina is asking what it's made of. I think there's no reason to doubt that it is made from the stone that came from the sky, the meteorite, whatever we call starfall. This is it's kind of a fantasy trope that this is where magic comes from, but from above, and magic comes down. But the kind of symbolism here is very clear. The red comet is what heralds the arrival of, well, who knows, the new long night, Azor Ahai reborn. That's there. It plays a huge part symbolically towards the end of towards the end of book one, beginning of book two. Here we have a comet which fell to Earth, which provided the sword. So it looks and feels relatively similar to Valyrian steel, but it is not Valyrian steel. It is magical, but exactly what magic it has is not really made clear. One thing is that it's clearly long lasting. It's lasted thousands of years. So that is one thing we've got going on. Beyond that, we've not really been told. We've not even been shown the sword yet. Gilio, channel member, fantastic to see you saying, could Dawn really be an artifact or weapon from the Far Eastern Associ cultures used to fight the others, analogous to Westerosi dragonglass blades? Quite possibly. So George R. R. Martin does emphasize a lot the fact that all the stories we have from the Age of Heroes and before, and this is even before the Age of Heroes, we should treat them as legends. We shouldn't treat them necessarily as truth. So everything I've said so far is largely treating that story as truth because it kind of stacks up and it kind of makes sense. But George R. R. Martin would always want us to think, well, maybe this is just inspired by the truth. Maybe this is the kind of story that the house wanted people to think about them, that this is magical artifact that they found there. They have this island, this place by right of them finding this wonderful magical a meteorite, forging this sword. That's the kind of thing that does happen back in those times. And could this just be a cover story for a rather dull somebody came over with a cool sword from the east? Maybe. It's not beyond George R. R. Martin to do that, but I don't think we've yet got any evidence one way or the other to say that it's exactly that. In the absence of that, I'm very happy to go with what we've been told, which is that this is a sword forged from a meteorite, or the metal in a meteorite that is magical, because this is a magical world. Maura Lee, hi there, Maura. Great to see you. Saying just a show of love and support. You're the best and loved. Hugs to Dan, your handsome dog. Well, thank you very much. I hugely appreciate that. And Commander Ray picking up on this kind of the origins question, saying, hello, Robert. I know many questions will be asked on the origins of House Dayne. I wanted to ask, when in relation to other groups did the Danes arrive in Starfall? And are they the only family of whatever ethnic group they originally came from to live in and around Starfall? And how did they integrate and begin interacting with the other peoples that dwell in that region of Westeros? So, interesting question, because the Danes do appear to have a very distinctive ethnic identity. Although their hair color seems to be, I mean, hair color is often a big thing with George R. R. Martin. Here, it does seem to be quite mixed. Some seem to have silver hair, some have dark hair, some have lighter hair. That doesn't seem to be a thing that everybody in that family has a certain hair color. However, they do often seem to have purple or bright blue eyes in a way that the Targaryens often do. Now, George R. R. Martin was asked about this. Are they actually proto-Targaryens? Are they Valyrians? What's going on there? And his answer was, sometimes different genetic groups have similar characteristics about them. That doesn't mean that they're linked. It just sometimes happens that way. And I think the clear steer from him is no, they're not Valyrians, which means that if we assume that they did come from Essos, and they came from Essos quite early, and there's no reason, I think, to doubt either of those things, then could they be from a sort of a root, the same kind of root as the Valyrians? Could they come from the Great Empire of the Dawn? For those who don't know, this is one of the great, I mean, we don't have huge amounts of information about it, but it's clearly a huge empire that existed in the far east of Essos around the time, and stretching a long way either way, but around the time of the original first Long Night. Could they come from there in some way? I buy it. I think it works well. I don't think we have the evidence to say definitely, but I think I completely buy the idea that could work. As for how they fit in with other kind of ethnicities around and when did they arrive compared to others, well, we know if you go to that, look at the map that we've got there, if you go a little bit further inland from there, you'll see High Hermitage, which is a cadet branch of the Danes. So this whole area, they were the kings of the Danes, were the kings of the Trondheim, that river. So that whole valley seems to have been theirs for quite a long time. And so they ruled there. They had a cadet branch from there. If you go the next inlet along, you'll find that that is where Old Town is now. And we were looking a lot at Old Town last time. And one of the things which came out very strongly from that is that Old Town is the first trading point that we know of in Westeros. So that is also really, really ancient. If you're looking for where did humanity start in Westeros, you sometimes think, oh, it must be over like the eastern end of Dawn, when across the land bridge and all the peoples came across there. Actually, it seems that humanity, the first men, or whatever ethnicity that we're talking about here, where they started was along the coast and in these inlets just near the reach and the rivers that sort of head inland. So the High Towers, George R. Martin has said, are the oldest house in Westeros. I think the implication is that the Danes they may be the second oldest. They're certainly one of the first handful or so oldest houses in Westeros, and their ethnicity, like perhaps the High Towers, is slightly different from the rest of the first men that came across. Maura Lee, just saying for my fellow mods, thank you very much. Yes, if you are here in the chat, please do send a little bit of love to the moderators. The moderators do a fantastic job here. I can see we've got 3 or 4 of them all. I'll give a quick shout out to some of them. Carl Karsnark is there, Andrew Kay is there, Stephanie Frederick is there, Maura Lee is there, Agreed Weirwood is there. So there's a few of them. Please do go and show a little bit of love if you're enjoying the chat, if you're feeling that this is the kind of place where you can just nerd out about the things you love and not worry too much about all of the trolls and the like. That's because the moderators are fantastic. So please do show them a little bit of love, and my personal thanks as well to the moderators. Let's go to a question from Catherine Fursith, saying, hi, Robert. I wondered about House Dayne's involvement with the politics of the Seven Kingdoms during the ages. They seem to have a lot in common with House Hightower, mysterious, unknown origin and appearance in Westeros. Is a common trait between them also non-involvement in Westeros, officially that is? Or has House Dayne actually been a player in politics, intrigue, etc., on a national scale? Well, I think that the link or the similarities between House Dayne and House Hightower, they're definitely worth considering. Those two houses, very old houses, slightly different ethnicity perhaps to the rest of the houses around them, and settling on islands. I've many times gone off on this like mini rant about the importance of islands in A Song of Ice and Fire. Both of them are settled on islands. The High Tower is on Battle Island. Starfall is an island. They're both these islands just in the mouth of a really important river. So the similarities are definitely there. Is there a similarity in terms of how they have got involved? Well, yes, again, sort of, not 100%. House Hightower and House Dayne, they were both kings back in the day of their area. And both of them seem to, we don't have all of the history of these families way back in the Age of Heroes, but neither of them seem to have been particularly expansive. They've not really been looking to stretch their borders hugely, as far as we can tell. Are happy to be running their area. As far as House Dayne are concerned, obviously we've got the mountains to the west of them. To the east, we've got another load of mountains, and that's where House Fowler are based. And House Fowler they don't get huge amounts of mentions, it has to be said, but they are one of the 3 biggest, most powerful houses in Dawn before the Martells arrived. the other one being House Ironwood. So they are hugely powerful and important, and kind of kept the Danes penned into their valley, their river valley. I think the difference would be that the Hightowers have established ways to influence events nationwide. Now, the extent to which they are kind of pulling the strings and doing things like that, we can go into some point, I'm sure. But there is no doubt that the Maesters, the Faith of the Seven that they welcomed in and set up a home base for the Faith of the Seven in Old Town, they've established the city itself, the biggest metropolis for almost all of Westeros's history, the biggest metropolis in all of Westeros. House Hightower kept themselves at the heart of influence. They may never have made a pitch until we get to the Dance of the Dragons. Whole different story. They may never have made a pitch to rule massive empires across all of Westeros, but they did keep influence much wider. With House Dayne, they don't seem to. They seem to have been very happy just staying where they are. As long as they have their sword, as long as they have their castle on their island, they seem to be happy. So there is a slight difference there. I mean, the Hightowers could have done more. Their main focus is looking after their city, etc., looking after their tower. So there are echoes there, but House Dayne are even more focused in on their thing. And to the extent that if you look at the world of Ice and Fire, there's this whole extra section about the Sword of the Morning rather than the history of House Dayne. House Dayne, that history pops up now and then, but there's a spotlight, as it were, on their sword rather than on their house. Let's quickly flick through the chat. Andrew Kay saying it's possible the Hightowers and Danes could have both filled that Velaryon-type role in the Great Empire of the Dawn, just below the top tier before the migration. Yeah, absolutely, that's possible. Cannibal the Dragon says, or asks, does Brienne live on an island? Well, Tarth is indeed an island, yep. And also there's Bear Island, which gave us Long Claw. Actually, well, okay, I'll do the island thing very, very quickly. Islands are clearly important. Now, I've drawn my own conclusions about why and what's going on here. But if you just look at the places which seem to be important when it comes to what is needed to fight the battle to come, the next long night, the heart of the Weirwood network appears to be on the Isle of Faces. The Dragonglass Mine is on Dragonstone, another island. The Sword Dawn is on an island. The High Tower, which has a connection to the wall, you can apparently see the wall from the High Tower, is on an island. So islands are important in some way. We also get, as you pointed out, Brienne now. I don't know whether this is as important, but the Even Star Island, Tarth. This is again connected with the long night. So there are lots of islands which seem to be important in this. Gilio saying, can House Dayne's lands field much of an army, or are they limited to their skillful knights and household retainers? We only hear about the latter. Yeah, we're not told exactly how big an army. I mean, they surely can, but it's not massive. They are involved. So House Dayne are involved through the years with lots of battles against the Reach, and we hear about them being involved in struggles against the Targaryens later. They clearly can field an army, but it isn't massive. Dawn as a whole doesn't have a huge army. They kind of inflate their figures. We get Doran Martell basically kind of admits that. It's like we'll allow people to believe that we can field more people than we actually can, because that that helps us. That makes people believe that we're more powerful than we actually are. So yes, they do have an army, but there's no indication that it's a particularly strong or powerful one. Let's have a quick flick through. Let's go to a question from Hermione saying, "Hello, Robert. Hello. Thank you once again for taking us on a deep dive. You're very welcome. A lot of people ask for these kind of deep dives. Do let me know if that's the kind of thing you prefer compared to the broader looking at regions with diving deep into particular families." Hermione saying, "Ashara Dayne is described as having violet eyes and blonde hair. Yet the Danes are not Targaryen, right? Could this point to them being descendants of the Empire of the Dawn?" Yes, so we were sort of covering this. So the eyes do seem to be a Dane thing. The hair, we get lots of. So Darkstar, who we'll come on to in a bit, he has dark hair with a sort of a white streak to it. Ned Dane, Edric Dane seems to have fair hair. Ashara Dayne, darker hair. But the color of the House Dane's hair seems to be a little bit all over the place. The eyes, however, do hint at some kind of particular genetic inheritance. Now, what I kind of hinted at earlier, but just to clarify, I think it's likely that the House Dane did come across. They were one of the very first houses to come across. They came across from at the time of the Great Empire of the Dawn, so they came across. It's actually more, rather than trying to come up with a reason why they might be from the Great Empire of the Dawn, given that that seems to be reasonably technologically advanced, and we get the legend that people went sort of looking for following this shooting star. It does seem to imply that House Dane came from afar. I think we're in a position where it's more the onus is on arguing that this isn't somebody from the Great Empire of the Dawn rather than this is. So I think our default position is that yes, they came from the Great Empire of the Dawn. The more intriguing question that I think is one that we do not have an answer to, rather than purely speculatory ones, is what does that mean? Did they have a position of power? Were they authorized to do this in some way? Is this some kind of power play? None of that we actually know. But to say they came from the Great Emperor of the Dawn just seems like the standard default answer here, I think. Commander Ray, question, channel membership question. If you're, just for those who don't know, channel membership, you can become a member of this channel and your questions will get highlighted. And so it's easier for me to spot them. You also get a few free super chats effectively, which get completely highlighted. And the best way to support this channel, and I'll do my thank you straight away, get it out of the way. Patrons, the best way to support this channel is through Patreon. If you wish to do so, there is a link down in the description. If you do not wish to go through Patreon, then being a channel member is also hugely appreciated. Commander Ray saying, "This story is full of conspiracies to put different people on thrones. Do you think there could be one surrounding Jon involving the Danes?" I mean, that depends what you mean by conspiracy to do with the Danes. We'll get into the ins and outs of the Tower of Joy in huge detail soon, I am sure. But at a very high level, I think it's beyond doubt. House Dane were very, very closely involved with Rhaegar. Arthur Dayne was his best friend. He was one of the people guarding the Tower of Joy. Ashara Dayne was lady in waiting to Elia Martell, Rhaegar's wife. They were at the heart of this. The closest place, one of the closest places to the Tower of Joy in Dawn was Starfall. Ned went there straight afterwards. It's almost impossible to um, tell this bit of the story without thinking of House Dayne as being absolutely central to what happened. So if you buy into, and I think we probably 99.5% of the way there, this idea that John was born at the Tower of Joy, the son of Rhaegar and Lyanna, and Ned promised Lyanna that he would protect his identity and hide him, but he was obviously the son of the heir to the Iron Throne. If you buy into that and you accept the fact that the Danes were there and this is all, they were central to everything that was going on, then yeah, I don't think I don't think it's even a conspiracy to say that House Dayne are central to this idea that John is potentially the heir to the Iron Throne. Um, let's go to Michelle Ramo saying, "Hi, Robert. I hope all is well with you and Dan the dog. It is. Thank you very much. How do you think Howland Reed actually killed Sir Arthur Dayne? Do you think it was similar to the show, or there's a popular theory that Howland might have used a poisoned blow dart to kill him? Or my personal favourite, which is a popular funny joke I've seen, he killed him with his Valyrian steel shotgun." Um, Connected with this, Sir Friend also says, "Could I talk a bit about what truly happened to Arthur Dayne? Did he really die? Is it possible the Danes really loved Ned for saving Ashara in spite of killing Arthur? However, it makes slightly more sense to me if Arthur also survived. Can't wait to hear all the inevitable Tower of Joy and Dawn discussion tonight." Yeah, so let's dig into this now. So Ned and his companions head to the Tower of Joy, and there are 7 of them, and they encounter 3 Kingsguard, one of whom is Arthur Dayne. And of them, only 2 lived to ride away. That's the phrase that we have from Ned's memory. Only 2 lived to ride away, him and Howland Reed. So we often get caught up, I think, in the fact that a lot of what we have about the Tower of Joy is a fever dream from Ned. And George R. R. Martin is very clear. Fever dream means you shouldn't take it literally. So if we leave that completely to one side, we don't try and draw any conclusions for that. I think we can draw some conclusions, but we won't for one moment. We'll leave that to one side. What we know is the 7 arrived, were faced by the 3, only 2 lived to ride away. And that is not fever dream. That is Ned remembering stuff. He also remembers that, but for Howland Reed, Arthur Dayne would have killed him. I think we can draw the reasonable conclusion that there was a fight, backed up by the fever dream, which I'll come to in a moment. But I think we can draw, given the way that Arthur Dayne would have killed Ned Stark, but for Howland Reed. Does this mean that Ned Stark or Howland killed Arthur Dayne? No, logically. Ned and Howland survived and Arthur Dayne did not. That does not necessarily mean that he died in combat. Now, this was, I did a whole massive video series all on Robert's Rebellion, the Tower of Joy, and things like that. I am working my way through that. That is going to slowly get re-uploaded over the course of the next year or so. I want to just look again at a lot of that. One of the things, the bits that we don't have huge amounts of information on is the Tower of Joy. However, we do have those bits of information, and we should not Therefore, just because it was on the TV show, yes, Howland Reed killed Arthur Dayne, we shouldn't necessarily draw the conclusion that that is what happened in the book. He did die, however. Now, it's possible, and what I argued when I did my videos the first time around, and I think it's still a reasonable working assumption, is that Arthur Dayne killed himself. Now, why might that be? If we bring back in the fever dream, we're not to take it literally. So there's a whole conversation that happens in the fever dream. There are like characters appear like these kind of spectral figures and things like that. And it all ends in this very kind of atmospheric way with rose petals in the air. But the vast majority of that fever dream is a conversation. And the conversation is between the Kingsguard and Ned, basically. Ned has arrived there at the Tower of Joy and basically starts questioning them. He said, where were you? I was expecting to see you at the Battle of the Trident. And they weren't there. I was expecting you, if you weren't there, then I was expecting you to be there at Storm's End, but you weren't there. I was expecting maybe you would be defending King's Landing with the king, but you weren't there. And the message comes back again and again and again. We were doing our duty. And the way that this is told, the clear implication is because Rhaegar's son is there. And this is, they think, the heir to the throne. And so as Kingsguard, actually, they probably now think that they are guarding the king. So that is what they signed up to do. And when I say they probably now think they're guarding the king, by the point that Ned gets there, Aerys, the Mad King, is dead. So the king is dead. His heir, Rhaegar, is dead. Rhaegar's his son and his daughter are dead. However, Rhaegar had one more child. They know in the Tower of Joy, who we know as Jon Snow. And for them, that will be the king. So, in that context, the Kingsguard, when we know this Kingsguard, they had many great points and they also had many great flaws. And one of their great flaws is the fact that they took their vows seriously, really, really seriously. They were there to protect the king, regardless of what the king was like, what the king did. They stood by the Mad King no matter what. And here they were standing by protecting what they now think is the king. So they are not backing down. They are not handing over their king to the rebels. That is the feel we get from that fever dream, is I expected to see you here. We weren't there because we are doing our duty. I expected you to see this other place. We weren't there because we're doing our duty. I expected you to see this other place. We weren't there because we are doing our duty. That is the message that we've got. And so whether or not that conversation exactly happened, and I'm sure it didn't happen exactly like that, the fever dream feeling that comes to Ned is that Kingsguard, Arthur Dayne, they were doing their duty. In their mind, they were there protecting their king. Now, if you take someone who is that focused, that obsessed with doing what I'm sure was the last command they were given by Rhaegar, which was to guard this tower with their life and to guard the new prince with their life. And then they're faced with Ned Stark, who is one of the chief rebels. Could Arthur Dayne stand aside? Well, maybe. But would he see that as being... Could he do that with his honor intact? Perhaps not. So that's the conundrum you're in. And that's why I think him taking his own life in this kind of like honorable way in his mind is one of the most likely options as to what actually happened. I think him actually being killed by Howland Reed, it would have to be via magic rather than a sort of strength of arms. I don't think Howland Reed was particularly strong. And I think that what you're hinting at here, who was it? I think it was a friend who was hinting at here. We have to take into account the attitude of House Dayne towards Ned Stark when we're trying to figure out all of this and what might have happened. And we'll dig into this a little bit more later, but it's a massive clue. The fact that House Dayne love Ned Stark. They don't just like respect him, think he's a good guy. It's not that they think, oh, you brought our sword back, thank you very much. They hero worship him there. They name their eldest son and heir after him. They tell such amazing stories of him that Edric, Ned, Dayne tries, when he's in the capital and he hears that Ned Stark is there, he tries to sneak in just to get a little glimpse of him. They think he's amazing, Ned Stark. Now, could that happen if Ned Stark did all of the terrible things that are alleged about him? No, absolutely 100% not. He has to have not just been neutral towards the Danes, he has to have done some pretty amazing things. Now, if he delivered them up their ancestral sword, but say, well, here's the sword back, but I only got it because I killed Arthur, your son, that doesn't put him on like a wow, we hero worship you level. That just maybe puts him on level terms. There has to be other things that make it make him be viewed that way by House Dayne. Now, I don't know, and I will come, as I say, I'll come to this again when I redo that video, but my instinct is that it's an incredibly valid perspective, given the information we have, the feel we got from the Fever Dream, given the way that House Dayne view Ned Stark, that Ned did not kill Arthur Dayne, nor did Ned watch Howland Reed doing it in some kind of underhand way and then allowed Howland to get off scot-free. Neither of those things give the feel of somebody who gets hero worshipped by House Dayne. He has to, at the very least, have allowed him to take his own life with dignity. That, I think, is the minimum that we're to expect from here. I don't think that there's a way around the wording that allows us to say that he survived that. So he either died in combat or he died of his own hand afterwards. Those, I think, are the two options. Martin S. saying, hello and good evening, Robert. We'll probably be back later in the stream, a bit busy at the moment. Well, fantastic to see you, Martin. Yeah, do come back whenever you can. Let's have a quick flick through the chat. There's always a lot of good comments about this. Andrew K saying House Dayne veneration of Ned Stark certainly pours cold water on a lot of rumored in-universe stories or tales on the Tower of Joy and the Ashara situation. Yeah, I mean, we can quickly touch on. I've got a question about Ashara, but I'll pick up on this now. This is the love that House Dayne has for Ned Stark definitely means, again, as a bottom level, whatever good things he did to deserve their praise and love, he did not do what the rumors are that he did, which was she fell in love with him, he married someone else, but still made her pregnant, then came down, told her that he killed her brother. She committed suicide, and then he took the baby away from her and refused to acknowledge that she was the mother. That is not something that a story that leads up to House Dayne naming their firstborn son and heir after Ned. He did not do those things. I think we can be reasonably clear that is the case. We'll get into Ashara Dayne and what might be going on there in a moment, but I think the idea that even just that last bit, that he took her child or their child away and refused to acknowledge her as the mother, and she committed suicide, just that does not lead to them naming their firstborn son and heir after him, at the very least. And that's just like, you're a long way away from it. Right, let's go into the chat. Got a few more questions here somewhere. CK saying, has Howland Reed still not appeared in the story? Not personally yet. George R. Martin has said specifically that Howland Reed will appear, but he knows too much at this moment in time, and so he can't appear just yet. He is there, almost certainly, in the neck in Greater Water Watch. Howland Reed, Auntie Slow saying, Howland Reed killing Arthur would present issues if we believe Ashara married him with the knowledge of House Dayne. Yeah, absolutely. Matt Hemming, welcome to you. And Urias Tosh saying he did the Stark thing. He beheaded Arthur with ice. It's entirely possible. I mean, it has to be an honourable thing. Is where I'm at, and him just saying, "So I beheaded him." It was an honourable thing to do. Maybe that works. Because it's worth saying, in all of this, we've not met House Dayne. We've met Edric, Ned Dayne, but he's just a child still. And so he just gives a few of the stories we've got going on. We've not met any of the adult members of House Dayne. And we've never obviously met Ashara or Arthur Dayne. So any talk that we might have of this is what they're like as a family. They're caring, they are manipulative, they're whatever. We don't know because we haven't met them. Weirwood saying Ned was on the side of Robert the usurper. If Eddard had given John to Robert, look at Rhaegar's other children. Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, I think the idea is that Ned would not have done that, and I think they knew that. Okay, let's go to Jamie, the guy saying, could Arthur Dayne be alive? I mean, we've sort of talked around this one a little bit. I mean, my instinct is no, because you've got to work your way around the line. Actually, I may even have the line here open. So this is what we have, and this is incidentally the only mention of the phrase Tower of Joy in the entire A Song of Ice and Fire. This is Ned, who, not in his fever dream, and he's talking about Jory Castle, who had just died in King's Landing. He's thinking about him and what to do and where he should be buried. And he said he'd have to lie beside his grandfather, is what he says. It would have to be his grandfather, for Jory's father was buried far to the south. Martin Castle had perished with the rest. Ned had pulled the tower down afterward and used its bloody stones to build 8 cairns upon the ridge. It was said that Rhaegar had named that place the Tower of Joy, but for Ed it was a bitter memory. They had been 7 against 3, yet only 2 had lived to ride away, Eddard Stark himself and the little Cranagman Howland Reed. So is there a way George R. R. Martin could sort of wheedle his way out of that? I mean, this is not Ned trying to deceive anyone. These are Ned's own thoughts. His own thoughts are that there were 7 against 3, so that's 10. 2 of them lived to ride away, is what he says. Only 2 had lived to ride away. Martin Castle had perished with the rest, and he had built 8 cairns upon the ridge. So 10 minus the 2 who lived to ride away leaves 8. Is there a way you could wheedle yourself out of that? I mean, maybe George R. R. Martin could if he really wanted to, but my instinct is that that's pretty clear. That's pretty clear that there were 10 people there, and then 8 of them died and were buried there. So, yeah, it's there are lots of theories about maybe he survived. I personally don't buy them. I don't put it past George R. R. Martin to be able to do this, but he's given nothing in the books that we have to suggest that that is the case. Okay, let's go to a question from Andrew Biederman. Hello, Robert. Does House Dayne as a group know where Ashara is and what really happened with her? We know about Barristan's opinion of what happened at the tourney with her and Ned. There's a theory of her being in the neck with the Cranagmen. If she disappears after sharing Ned's tent and getting mixed up with the Northmen, wouldn't that be yet another thing that should make House Dayne upset with Ned? Well, yeah, potentially. Um, but let's build on. I will go into Ashara Dayne in just 1 second, but it's worth being aware of the context to all of this when we're thinking about what might or should have happened to House Dayne. Robert Baratheon hated Rhaegar. Absolutely loathed Rhaegar. He's still, even into 15 years later, when we get into book 1, he's still there, just like seething with anger at Rhaegar. And what you see during and after Robert's rebellion is that anyone associated with Rhaegar is killed or exiled. There's no one left who was close to him. So Elia, his wife, dies, and their 2 children die. Arthur Dayne, we've already talked about, dies, but also John Connington, exiled, and we're told died. He didn't actually, but that's a slightly different matter. The 2 squires that Rhaegar had, one is killed, and the other, Miles Mouton, is killed, and the other, Richard Lonmouth, disappears. Now, there's a whole rabbit hole there if you wish to go down there, about he's possibly Lemon Cloak, but he disappears as well. What on earth would happen to Ashara Dayne? Almost certainly, Robert Baratheon would want her killed. So that is the context, because she was so closely associated with Rhaegar and Elia. Almost certainly Robert Baratheon would want her killed. So that's the context we have to be working with here. And House Dayne itself, not only they were the house most closely associated with Rhaegar, the house as a whole had to be aware, uncertain, concerned about the fact that the new king could just order them struck off completely. So that's the context to everything that's going on here. So Ned, before we go down any other rabbit holes here, Ned going to Starfall directly after the Tower of Joy, him going there, even if it's just on the mission that he tells everyone it was to return the sword, that was a huge political decision on his part. He will have been, why are you going there? This is House Dayne supported Rhaegar to the absolute hilt, and you're going out of your way to give them back their sword. No, this was a big move by Ned to be going there. This was quite brave. Robert Baratheon had a huge temper. So that's the context to all of this. Now, what is going on with Ashara Dayne? Now, the story that has gone out is that Ned and Ashara were in love, and that they met at the tourney at Harrenhal. There were things happened in a tent there. We'll get back to that in 1 second. Things happened in a tent there. She had his child, and that is the baby Jon Snow. Ned collected the child, headed back up north, but refused to say that this was hers. So that's the rumor that had reached Catelyn's ears. That's a rumor that Cersei had heard as well. It's a rumor that was allowed to spread. It seems to have been a rumor that the Danes themselves allowed to kind of get out there as well. So that's the story that we have to the public. I don't buy that for a number of reasons. One, just at a kind of a story level, if Jon is the son of Ned and Ashara Dayne, it actually means nothing. Why on earth is he being so secretive? There's nothing important here. Why on earth are the Danes not annoyed and saying, well, that's our son up there, that's our boy, who's been taken? Why are they so relaxed about all of this? It doesn't quite add up on a story level. And then you can start going down this rabbit hole. Again, this is a video I did ages ago. I will put this one back up again because I think it's quite central to our understanding of what might have happened at that time. So after Bran heads off, leaves Winterfell, and they're heading north, and he has these conversations with Jojen and Mira Reed, who are the children of Howland Reed. And they know a lot. Clearly, they know a lot about what happened. They've been told things that Bran hasn't. And Jojen tells a story that their father, Howland, had told this story so many times. They knew this story because his father had told this story so many times. And it's the story of the lad who is Howland Reed at the tourney at Harrenhal. And we know this is the lad, and he turns up there, and lots of things happen, and he gets to a dance, and he sees this beautiful raven-haired beauty with these wonderful purple eyes. He remembers exactly who she dances with, and she's the maiden. Every other character within this story is known by their nicknames to do with their house: the young pup, the dragon prince, that kind of thing, the white sword, who they are. But the two main characters are the lad and the maiden. And the story structure is very much about, this is how these two people, this is structured like a love story. And Jojen's there like, are you sure your father never told you about this? And Bran's like, no, didn't say. And we therefore, if you just pause for a moment and you just think about what's going on there, if this is the story of what happened at Harrenhal, which seems to be the story of what happened at Harrenhal, which is told by Howland Reed. This is the story he tells his children about what happened there, which is around the time that he met his mother. And he tells this story to his children about how he met this beautiful woman with this wonderful flowing dark hair with these beautiful piercing eyes, and she danced so beautifully with all of these people. And if this isn't a How I Met Your Mother story, it's really weird that he told his children, around the time I met your mother, I met this really hot woman, and this is what she looked like, and this was what was going on. The most logical conclusion we have to draw from that story that Howland Reed told his children, was that that was a How I Met Your Mother story. That's kind of backed up, I think, by a throwaway remark we get. The story we're told, the official story, is that Ashara Dayne went to Ned Stark's tent, and the hints are, oh, people heard stuff going on there, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Tents, don't keep much noise in. But there's a throwaway room, and that is what everybody seems to believe. They saw her going into the tent, they heard the sounds, and that seems to be what everyone believes, that it was Ned. But the throwaway remark we get is that Ned shared his tent with Howland. So it's not necessarily Ned that she went in to see. Now, if you then take that as okay, so we've got the How I Met Your Mother story with well, maybe there was a misunderstanding. Maybe this is the two of them getting together at Harrenhal. Then you go, okay, so what potentially should happen then at the end of this story? If Ashara and Howland, they're in love. However, Ashara Dayne is, she's in danger. Probably Robert Baratheon would want her killed. Ned Stark says, here's the plan. Here's your sword back, and let's fake her death. So Robert Baratheon no longer thinks that she's around. Let's leak the story out that she faked her death because this is my son with her. But actually, secretly, Ashara and Howland can get together and they go off and live in the Neck. Nobody goes to the Neck. If they stay there, they're safe. They're under my protection. I am the Lord, the Lord Paramount of the North. That is where they can stay, and they're safe. And sure enough, Howland Reed has never left there. Does that make sense? Well, it does, because you then get these other kind of like weird little hints that maybe there's something going on there in the Neck, which we're only ever told the names of 4 members of House Reed in the entire history of House Reed. We get Howland and his 2 children, and then we get his wife, whose name is Gianna, Jyanna, Gianna. Now, George R. Martin loves wordplay, and if you take John and Lyanna, put them together, that makes Gianna. It makes sense. But also, you get the fact that when Maura and Jojen go to introduce themselves to their new liege lord, Bran, effectively, who's standing at the time for Robb, it's very clear that the heir is Maura, not Jojen, which it goes against pretty much all of the northern customs that the man would inherit before the woman. Where might this peculiar custom have come from? Well, Dorne is the place that we know that they're kind of gender neutral on this. If you're the oldest, you will inherit. So all of this kind of adds up. There's a whole load of other evidence there. George R. R. Martin loves these kind of like little hints there to Barris and Selmy talking about mudmen and things like that. All of this just works and adds up. Is it full evidence? Is it definitely the case? I don't think it's 100% the case, but I love it as a theory. And for me, this ultimately solves the big issues we've got, which is the fact that Robert Baratheon had to be sure that House Dayne was dealt with and they were no longer a threat. Secondly, probably most importantly, why is it that House Dayne love Ned Stark? What could he possibly have done to earn that kind of adoration? And I think the answer has to be not just he returned their sword, which is good, but also he saved the life of their daughter by offering her his protection when he could very easily have just handed her over to Robert Baratheon. So that's my working theory. And well, I'd love to know what you think. Let me know in the chat. I'll go have a quick flick through. Gilio's saying, was it Arthur Dayne who informed Ned of the truth about Lyanna and Rhaegar, and how much of House Dayne knew it as well? Well, how much of House Dayne knew about it? It's not 100% clear. Who told Ned about the truth of Rhaegar and Lyanna? My instinct is that that was actually Benjen. So Benjen was very close to Lyanna, and all the clues at the tourney at Harrenhal was that he was the one who was setting all of these kind of stuff up. When you get Lyanna there saying before the night of the Laughing Tree, I firmly subscribe. We're slightly digressing away, but I firmly subscribe to the idea that Lyanna is the Knight of the Laughing Tree. And when Lyanna's there saying to Howland Reed, "Hey, you should get revenge. You should enter the tourney," and Howland's like, "No, no, not for me." The person who's there by her side saying, "I know how to get a horse. I can find some armor." That's Benjen. Benjen was in on this, and I think that he knew about the two of them. But I think he kept that a secret and headed up north, not knowing that this was going to blow up, that this was going to be a massive issue. Again, another video I will redo at some point is, I think this is a big part of why Benjen went to the war, because he knew about what was going on there, and he didn't say anything. He was still a kid. He was still a child at the time. We probably can't really be too harsh on him, but he knew, and he said nothing, and that contributed to the war happening. Hence him sending himself up to the wall afterwards. So I think when Ned goes up, when war has been declared, Ned heads up north, gathers the Northern Army. I think that's the point at which Benjen tells him what's going on or what happened, but by then it's too late. War is already happening. There's no way out of this. It can't be stopped. So I think Benjen was the person who said, I think probably Arthur Dayne knew. Obviously, he knew what was going on, and maybe they had a conversation with it at the Tower of Joy, but that's not how Ned found out. Right, let's go have a quick flick through the chat. Human-shaped dog saying he tried to be a good wingman for his sister. accidentally started a civil war. I hate it when that happens. Yep, pretty much that's what my my working theory is. Andrew K saying the Danes venerating Ned certainly means they did not dishonorably kill Arthur or result in Ashara's death, and clearly returned their ancestral sword. And there we get having a quick flick through Levac, saying the clearest and least confusing part of the fever dream was about Lyanna herself. Ned remembers actual details instead of amorphous misty men in white armor without faces. Yeah, I mean, we shouldn't take the fever dream, as George R. R. Martin tells us, we shouldn't take it literally, but I think the end bits and the promise me Ned in particular is echoed through so much of what Ned remembers that feels like something she definitely said. The fact that she's dying there also echoed by other things that Ned thinks about. So a lot of that last bit definitely seems backed up, not in that poetic way, but it certainly seems backed up by other things that Ned thinks about. Now, Howland, I think summarizing my position here, returned the remains of their star son, returned their magic sword, hid their daughter away, and saved her life, hero to the Danes. Yeah, I mean, I said the only bit I would disagree with there, I think that he buried in a cairn, he buried Arthur Dayne there rather than returned him. Cannibal the Dragon saying it's weird to me that when Robert Baratheon goes north, he doesn't stop to meet Howland Reed to get through the area, and the same when Robert and Ned go back to King's Landing, like that was on purpose. Yep, it's noticeable. So Ned clearly trusts Howland Reed, clearly has a good and a strong history with Howland Reed, and yet the idea of kind of like stopping off en route it doesn't really come up. So it's almost certainly something that he's happy for Robert Baratheon not to meet Howland Reed there. Train Surfer asking if we need the map up at this point. I mean, I don't know if we always need the map up, but I like the map just personally. Parascopic saying I'm bothered by the amount of people in the fandom who insist Howland Reed must be the Knight of the Laughing Tree, but I guess to each their own with theories and such. Yeah, I mean, I've got no problem with people saying it's Howland Reed. I think the evidence suggests otherwise, but I can understand why people think that. Okay, let's go to some more questions from my patrons. Lady Vaughan-Strauss saying, I have personally never understood how in the world Jon Snow's parentage was kept a secret from the other characters. Some noble dude returns home with his raped dead sister's body, also a baby. Yeah, the math isn't exactly hard on that one, except to everyone in Westeros. So I guess my question is, did the wild misinformation about whose baby Jon is start in Dawn with the Danes themselves? Between Arthur protecting Lyanna and future Jon and the idea that Ashara's wet nurse Willa is his mother, it seems it might have been a part of the messy failed coup cover-up in Dawn, but also provided convenience to preserving Jon's life. How complicit were the Danes in Rhaegar and Lyanna's failed coup? Well, the end bit, how complicit were they? Very. Why did nobody do the adding up to say, hey, you've come back with a baby? Rhaegar and Lyanna were there somewhere together. Maybe some people did think of that possibility, but because what I think is a good bit of human psychology on George R. R. Martin's part. If Ned had returned saying, hey everyone, this is definitely my bastard son with that person over there. I know you all thought I was honourable. I'm not really. Sorry. But yeah, this was Ashara Dayne's son. If he'd done that, then perhaps people would have been a bit sus. But the fact that they had to try and work out that who it was, who the mother was, I think actually probably led people down the wrong path. It's quite clever by Ned, really, is the fact that he says, yeah, this is my bastard son, and not admit who the mother is, meant that people like Cersei, for example, could jump to a conclusion and go, oh, it's Ashara Daynes. And then that then becomes fact in people's minds. That's what's going on there. Um, the fact that Ned says and is happy, he's known as this honourable person, but is happy or not happy. He comes across as quite ashamed about this, but willing to do the honourable thing. He's admitting a fault. Again, is the kind of thing that makes people believe the lie. Um, the other thing I think to kind of point out here is that there was a lot going on, which sounds a little bit weak, but I think it's actually quite important. When Ned came back to King's Landing, it was to patch up an argument he'd had with Robert Baratheon, who was now king. He'd stormed out. He was basically, for most of the rebellion, he was equal partners with Robert. And it's only at the latter stages that Robert Baratheon suddenly said, right, and I'm going to be king. Ned was viewed as one of the top people, and if that relationship had stayed faltered, that would have been a massive issue. So the thing everybody was really focusing on was Ned's come back. How's this going to work with Robert Baratheon? Added to which, we then get Robert marrying Cersei Lannister, getting the Lannisters in. What's he going to be doing with the remnants of the old Targaryen reign and rule? He's setting himself up as a king. What about the Tyrells? How's he going to deal with them? How's he going to deal with Barristan Selmy? What about Jaime Lannister, who killed the king? Is he going to be allowed to stay in the Kingsguard? All of these questions, there was a lot going on, and Ned Stark turning up and like, oh, and I've got a bastard child, is like, this is not the most important thing going on right now. Him saying Lyanna's dead, so were the other members of the Kingsguard. People would have taken him at his word. So, yeah, perhaps some people might have sort of questioned it a little bit. Someone like Varys, somebody like Littlefinger, maybe. But overall, there was a lot going on. And why would you dispute what he said? Rabbi OB saying, do you think Dawn, the sword Dawn, is related to dragons? There's a lot of overlapping symbols regarding the moon cracking and birth of dragons and meteor shower. Could Dawn have been forged from meteors that birthed dragons? I mean, I think the idea that it was forged from a meteor is that works for me. I think the idea that meteors or the moon cracked and dragons came from it. This is a legend that we get from the Dothraki. Should we take their legends any more seriously than we take legends that we get from Westeros? I would argue no. Is this where dragons likely came from, above? I mean, perhaps. I don't think we've got any evidence for it, and I think this is the sort of the crux of this, is that I have seen this series. It's been a while since I've sort of looked into it, to be honest, but the idea that we should be hunting for a specific extra bit in the background of this story that it will explain everything going on, I don't think that's where we're going with this. This is a complex story already. Having moons cracking and dragons coming from there, I don't think we need that. I don't think we've got the evidence to suggest that that's the case. Doesn't mean it's not the case. It could be. It could be. But I don't think we've got much evidence to support that at the moment. Brendan, what is the important point about the House of Dayne that we are missing? I mean, I don't think. I mean, this is the boring answer. Don't think there is an important point that we're missing. I think we understand this. Um, the the bit perhaps that we might, if you say, what are we missing? I think the bit that a lot of us kind of implicitly think without having it actually written down anywhere is that this sword is important. It's not just another random cool sword. This is an important sword. And this is a sword which is associated with the end of the long night. It was the first time around. It will be the second time around. And potentially this is Lightbringer. Now, as far as we get to, as far as House Dayne itself, that therefore means that their role in this story historically has been to preserve the sword and to keep the sword safe. And what they have done is by staying on an island, by keeping out of, not trying to push their empire too far, and also not just handing this sword out to anyone, only people they can really, really, really trust with it get this sword. And when you add up all of that, that's a bit of soft evidence, I think, that this is their role. And perhaps their house words. George Martin has said, I think that no, he's not told us House Dayne's words because they are a little bit spoilery, and perhaps this is what their house words are alluding to, that we're holding on. They'll be better than this, but we're holding on to the sword until the second long night is the kind of thing that we're probably looking at. Andrew Case saying live comets and meteors are often mythicized as dragons, so Dawn is still dragon steel in a sense, with tech or properties seeming that seem similar to Valyrian steel as well. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the imagery is definitely there. I would say. Commander Ray saying we bring the dawn is like a 76% chance of being their house words. I mean, yeah, I maybe put it at 74 or 75%, but I would go with that. And let's go to Lady Vaughan-Strauss, another question, saying it seems to me that Prince Doran of Dawn would have been aware of Prince Rhaegar at the Tower of Joy, especially as Rhaegar seemed remarkably comfortable enacting all of these romantic machinations in his wife's homeland, of all places. This would mean Doran was a full participant in the plan between Rhaegar and Lyanna. If that is the case, do you think that Prince Doran's taciturn reticence towards vengeance on the Lannisters and the crown could be due to a tremendous guilt over his own complicity in this fiasco of an attempted coup? Okay, great wordplay there. Two parts to this. The first one, did the Martells, Doran, know about what was going on in the Tower of Joy? Yes. I think this is almost beyond doubt. The Tower of Joy is a watchtower on the Prince's Pass. The Prince's Pass is one of only two main routes into Dawn, the biggest and widest thoroughfare. And it has a house fowler, whose main duty and role is to be observing and protecting this thoroughfare, the Prince's Pass. There's a civil war going on at this time, and a civil war which is not just like happening way away from Dawn, but at least one of the battles between the Tyrells and the Baratheons happened just a few miles away from the Prince's Pass. If an army had taken a different route, they'd be heading down towards Dawn. The Prince's Pass will have had a very, very close eye kept on it by House Fowler in particular and the Dornish more generally. It's time of war, and they will have paid attention to who's coming into their country. And coming into their country was the prince who is married to their princess Elia, and what appears to be his new lover, and some members of the King's Guard. And they come down the Prince's Pass and they take up residence in one of the watchtowers for the Prince's Pass. That does not happen without the Martells being aware of it. So, there is no doubt in my mind that the Martells, Doran Martell, was very aware of this. Some people go, but surely, this was Rhaegar cheating on Elia. The Dornish is very relaxed about this. This is not an issue for them. Having paramours, having more than one lover, this is not an issue. They're absolutely fine with this. So the idea that Rhaegar might suddenly turn up with another woman would not faze them in the way that it would most of the other parts of the Seven Kingdoms. Doran was therefore, I'm guessing, therefore engaged in a kind of protracted discussion, maybe even negotiation with Rhaegar about Elia, because as far as we can tell, Rhaegar, he wanted this other child, and maybe he wanted to marry Lyanna. Maybe he had fallen in love with her. We don't know those details. Doran will have wanted to ensure that Elia was okay in all of this, and that the children that they had were still next in line to the throne. So there will have had to be some kind of negotiation. Rhaegar will have had to be discussing these kinds of things with the Martells, because they are the first people he had to get on side with this. So almost certainly what happened, and Doran kept his army back from participation in this war while this was going on. He only ultimately put his army into the field when the Mad King Aerys basically threatened Elia. And that's the only time ultimately Doran had to commit at that point. So yes, I think he knew about what was going on here. I think that although they may not have been on Team Rhaegar, so to speak, I think that they were a lot more relaxed about it, and they almost certainly will have preferred the idea of Rhaegar being on the throne than Aerys, who was rabidly anti-Dornish. When Elia and Rhaegar presented their firstborn to Aerys looked at it and smells Dornish. That is the kind of thing that would turn the Dornish against Aerys. So, as well as him basically imprisoning them and threatening their lives, so they were far more for Rhaegar than they were for Aerys. So, all of that said, yes, I think that he was aware. Is his reticence towards vengeance on the Lannisters and the Crown due to his guilt over his complicity in this? I would argue no. I think all we've said, we've not had a POV from his perspective. We've had Arya Hotar, and who we see him in action up close, and he does appear to be a very cautious and very calculated person. And I think he will have realized that him doing anything approaching a coup at that point was simply not going to work. What happened after the end of Robert's Rebellion is we get Oberyn went around and tried to gather together an army to go and take on Robert Baratheon, and then Doran stopped him. So what seems to have happened is that Doran persuaded Oberyn, okay, we've got a long-term plan. We will arrange marriages between our family and um, the Targaryens. Viserys and Arianne were had a marriage pact. So he has this longer-term plan that he's kind of working through. Short term, let's just attack the new regime, given the fact that the 10,000 soldiers from Dawn had gone up and lost in the Battle of the Trident, and Dawn has a lot fewer soldiers than they like to pretend, suggests to me that they would not have succeeded. And I think it was just a very sensible, practical response rather than any kind of sense of guilt or complicity. Okay, let's go to Brian Jukes saying, "Hi, Robert. Although I find the world of A Song of Ice and Fire generally immersive, I find George R. R. Martin's use of time unbelievable when it comes to how long lords have been in power. Perhaps it's because I'm comparing it to UK history, but it just seems a bit unlikely that a lord would be in power for so long. Shouldn't civilizations have developed a bit faster? What do you think?" Well, I'm not 100% sure when you're talking about how long lords are in power for. I mean, I think that when you're talking, say, Targaryen kings, monarchs, um, you get one who lasted for basically half a century, a few more that lasted for 10, 20 years, a few who lasted for just a few months or a few years. That all seems reasonable to me, and that kind of echoes in other lords. Um, when you go back in history and you find legends of some lords who rule for, like the Grey King over in the Iron Islands, allegedly ruled for 1,000 years, that's going into the realms of legend. That's like saying King Arthur reigned for however long. So I think we shouldn't take that necessarily at face value. The point about and what George R. R. Martin always emphasizes with these things, this is a fantasy world. There are things that don't seem realistic. The height of the wall, for example, could it really be that tall? That for all of its length, that high? And his answer is, this is a fantasy wall. It's supposed to be ridiculous. And so if there are some people who rule for a particularly long time, it's a fantasy rule. It's supposed to be ridiculous. So that's that part of it. In terms of civilizations developing, um, this is a this is a question which comes up quite a lot when it comes to Westeros, because although there does seem to be some technological advancement in Westeros over the years, certainly um, a movement from sort of iron to steel and things like that. Pardon me. It's not been huge, and we certainly don't seem to have reached any kind of renaissance or anything like that, which sort of rocket boosts development. And a lot of people have queried why that might be. There's certainly an element of knowledge being kept as a monopoly by the Citadel, and they are only sharing the knowledge that they wish to share with the people that they wish to share it with. And there's also another element of this feeling of we've lost the technology and are therefore in a kind of dark ages. When the doom of Valyria happened, that's George R. R. Martin has said this. The echo is very much that of like the fall of Rome, and the fall of Rome in Western Europe was, in popular history anyway. Historians forgive me, I know it's more complex than this, but in popular history, the fall of Rome was followed by the Dark Ages. The Dark Ages being so called because all of the technological progress of the Roman Empire, and the Romans had a lot of really good technology, that got lost people no longer knew how to do the things that the Romans knew how to do. And so actually there was a period where technology or technological development stagnated. And that's kind of the feel that George R. R. Martin brings to this, is that the Valyrians knew how to do really clever, advanced stuff. That got lost. And we've just got a few echoes of it. We don't know how Valyrian steel was made, but the stuff we've already got, a few people know how to reforge that into different shapes. That's the kind of idea that we've got here. We've lost the main bit of knowledge, but we've got a few scraps left over. So why haven't they advanced? We can come with some in-world answers, but again, we have to get to this idea. This is a fantasy world. George R. R. Martin wants it to be at this level of technology, so that's the level of technology he's brought it to. Noah Holland saying, the more I read about the Middle Ages, the more I feel George R. R. Martin's rate of technological progress is just about right. Interesting. Erin Sanek saying, the Citadel, what do they know and why are they hiding it? Absolutely, that's a great question. And Erin Sanek saying, Rome fell, but Constantinople didn't. Sorry, totally off topic. I know. Yeah, absolutely. As I say, historians, forgive me, I completely oversimplified. But yes, the idea, again, in popular history, the idea was that Constantinople then was this last great beacon of sort of Western civilization and knowledge. And Noah Howland pointing out, Venice had an arsenal just like Bravos does, not to be confused with what you call the greatest of English football clubs. So I will allow them to be one of the second tier greatest football clubs in England. But yeah, Bravos does have technological advancement that is not there. They can build a warship in a day. Apparently, they seem to have moved towards specialization of labor in building ships, which is obviously one of the first steps in industrialization. So there are pockets of this happening elsewhere in the world. Lady Pushkin's saying, I've been thinking about the Arthur Dayne theory about him still being alive. This could make sense from the perspective that he was allegedly the greatest swordsman at that time, therefore unlikely to be beaten, but not a certainty, I realise. What if the Battle of the Tower of Joy, nearing its end, with Ned, Arthur, and Howland left, that a maester or midwife shouted that Lyanna was dying, or Lyanna screaming that brought it to an end, and they all went to her, and then they agreed on this plan. The drawback to this, would it be something Sir Arthur Dayne would agree to if he was alive? Secondly, it would make more sense for him to take Lyanna's baby if he was. Could Howland or Ned defeat or kill Arthur Dayne? Would Howland, if the books align with the show, stab him in the back? Is that likely if Howland is in love with Ashara? Right, so there's a lot of questions here. But mighty be, I've covered why I think that the text doesn't seem to, I mean, I won't say it won't allow it, but George R. R. Martin made it very clear from Ned's perspective that it really would be him going, ha ha, I was tricking you, if it does turn out that Arthur Dayne survived, because he basically said it in 3 different ways in about 3 different sentences that Arthur Dayne died. Is it likely that Arthur Dayne would have lost at a fight? Personally, I don't think it is. That's another thing to add into this. There were 3 against 7, and I won't break down all of their specific fighting abilities, but I think it's fair to say that Howland Reed was not the greatest fighter there. Ned, definitely a good fighter. 2 or 3 of the others also seem to definitely be good fighters. However, Arthur Dayne seems to be an outstanding fighter. Gerald Hightower was a great fighter, but now probably slightly past his best. Oswald Went seems to have also been a very good fighter. So for the battle to end up being Ned and Howland, who probably wasn't actually involved in all of the fighting, against Arthur does kind of make sense. The idea that this was stopped by a shout or a plea for mercy or something along those lines also works for me. I think the wording was deliberately murky with the "he would have killed me but for Howland Reed" is what Ned thinks. And that doesn't mean that Howland Reed got involved and killed him. Otherwise, probably Ned would have thought, but Howland Reed killed him. It was, I would have died, but Howland Reed intervened in some way. Now, I think it seems likely that they're there, those three are there. Arthur Dayne was about to kill Ned, and then Howland goes, "Stop! I've got a cunning plan," or something along those lines. Or, "Stop! Can't you hear Lyanna crying out?" Something like that makes sense to me. I also kind of like this idea that Howland Reed is a magic user, and might he have done something? It's entirely possible that he could have stopped Arthur Dayne by using magic in some way. I don't know. I don't think that Howland Reed killed him. Similarly, for the same reason a couple of people have pointed out here, is that if we do buy into this idea that Howland Reed was in love with Ashara Dayne, him killing her brother probably doesn't work very well if he's then hoping to be marrying her soon. So he would probably be looking out for a way not to be killing Arthur Dayne. I do also think the point you make here, that it would, if he had survived, wouldn't it make more sense for him to take Lyanna's baby? I think if he had survived, he was honor bound to be protecting the baby. And I think that means that we would have had to have seen him somewhere in Winterfell, and we definitely haven't. There's nobody in Winterfell that could possibly be Arthur Dayne. If only because there was a large amount of people from Winterfell who came down for the tourney at Harrenhal and would have seen Arthur Dayne, and therefore would have recognised him if he suddenly magically appeared in Winterfell, which he was. Let's not forget, he was one of the most famous people in the entire Seven Kingdoms. Arthur Dayne wasn't just somebody who could grow a moustache and put on a wig and nobody would know who he was. He was one of the most famous people in the Seven Kingdoms. So, yeah, I think his honor would have meant that he would have had to be protecting Jon. And his fame means that people would have seen him. I did see a theory ages ago that he was, and I can't remember exactly which character, one of the characters up on the wall. That doesn't work for me on a number of levels, but one of these is the point that we've got here, which is that him being on the wall is not looking after or protecting Jon. And even if you say, well, Ned's plan was that he should go up to the wall, it was not. Ned had to be convinced to send Jon up to the wall in one of the early chapters of Song of Ice and Fire. It is suggested to him and he has to have a think about it, which clearly is not him going, "Oh, well, this was the plan all along. I was going to send him up there, so that's good, and now I can hand him back to Arthur Dayne." So none of that kind of works for me. I think Arthur Dayne is dead. The clear implication of what Ned thinks is that he is dead. There is no evidence anywhere that he is alive anywhere. I think that we would know if he was alive because he would be honor bound to be trying to protect Jon, and he's pretty famous, so people would recognize him. So I think he died. I think it unlikely that he died in combat because he was so good. And that just leaves us with, well, how could he have died? If somebody else didn't kill him, who's left? Okay, let's go to Parascopic saying, I think Arthur fell on his sword for honour's sake. He could not reconcile both his loyalty to Eris's Kingsguard, his bond with Rhaegar, and Howland's love for Ashara. Yeah, I mean, I think that's roughly where I'm at. I mean, I think he couldn't reconcile his loyalty to his Kingsguard vows with his need to, his inability to protect his charge, and also his acceptance of the fact that the best plan was for Ned to pass off this child as his own. Reflective rambling, great to see you. And let's go to a question from Maura Lee. What role will House Dayne play in the last two books, especially in regard to prophecy and the end game of A Song of Ice and Fire? What do you think? So this is one of those things. I think I mentioned this, I can't remember why, but in a live stream relatively recently. My instinct is that House Dayne's important role has happened already. So their important role has been to guard the sword through the ages, and then through Arthur and Ashara be involved in what happens during the turning at Harrenhal and Tower of Joy and all of that. As a family, I think their role is therefore complete, provided the sword gets to where it needs to get to. Now, my working assumption, I think I've got a question on him in a moment, is that Darkstar is going to steal it. And he will go and join the Kingsguard of Aegon the Sixth, adding to this kind of list of things that seem to legitimize him. Here's somebody here who is the heir with the Sword of the Morning, and is sort of reminiscent of Arthur Dayne, and that's just like the last Targaryen king had Arthur Dayne in his Kingsguard. Now we've got one here, that kind of feel. Once that then brings the sword into play, I think that Darkstar may well then die and the sword be passed on to someone else, probably Jon. Gina Z are saying, how did the Danes fare when Nymeria arrived in Dorne and later vis-a-vis the Targaryens? I recall that Egg's mother was a Dane, but I assume the Danes would have fought against Aegon to keep Dorne independent. Yeah, so there were kings of the Tontine when Nymeria and the Rhoynar invaded. They defeated them. The last king of the Torrentine, the last Dane king, was sent up to the wall. And the Danes bowed the knee, basically bent the knee. And a Dane was the third, I think, husband of Nymeria. So they not only accepted, okay, we're no longer kings, we've got new overlords, they completely bought into this, and they became, or they showed their power and strength by being one of the first political marriages that we've got going on for the new regime. So that's how they did with the Martells. That secured their role in Dorne going forward politically. And following on from that, when we get to the Targaryens, then they're not singled out particularly. When we get to the Dornish Wars, they're definitely there. We hear of the Danes being involved. Starfall is one of the places that the Visenya on Vagar burns to the ground. So when we're thinking of Starfall, it will have had to be rebuilt 300 years or so ago. But that's largely it as far as their role there. They definitely play a role. As for Egg's mother being a Dane, yes, this is Deanna Dayne, who was married to Maekar. She died before Maekar became king, but it does mean, therefore, that uh, two characters we know in particular, Maester Aemon and Egg, are both half Dane. Now, what does that mean? Well, magically, I think that there's probably a link in here with, if we've got this link to an understanding of the Sword of the Morning. So the question is, did they, and George R. Martin has, intriguingly, when he's talked about future Duncan Egg novellas, he has basically said he wants to go back to when they went to Dorne. Which is interesting because that would be a step back out of things progressing in him writing these in a chronological order. It's almost as if he goes, "Oh, there's some things I want to reveal." I don't know. Maybe he's just got a really good story he wants to tell. But the Egg's link across to Dorne and the House Dane is a significant one, and maybe this is how we get to see Starfall, and maybe this is how we get to see the Sword Dawn. George R. Martin shows it to us in a Duncan Egg story. Let's go to Brygerd saying, "I'm afraid Darkstar is so edgy he might fall off a cliff. Similarities to Ashara, perhaps." Yeah, good. Ashara is Deanna Reed, in my opinion. Yeah, I would agree with that. Darkstar is definitely. We'll get onto him in just 1 second, I promise. But yeah, he's loose cannon. He plays for himself. He's not. He's part of a cadet branch. Well, I'll talk about him a little bit now. He's part of a cadet branch of House Dane, and he seems to be jealous of Arthur Dayne and how much everyone loves Arthur Dayne. And so, yeah, he's edgy. I think he's probably hot-headed. I think that's probably a word I would use more. Julian Ivanov, off topic, sorry, but I have been wondering whether you think it's possible that ice was originally a sword that belonged to a giant. So ice, the ancestral sword of House Stark. So the sword we have right now, as ice, no, I don't believe so. That is a Valyrian steel sword. That means that everybody will have been aware of it. They will have ordered it. They'll have paid a lot of money for it. It will have come in, and it won't have had a previous giant owner. However, I can't remember whether we've been actually told it. It's just accepted that there was a previous sword called Ice, which was not Valyrian steel. Where did that come from? I think the implication has to be that that was the ceremonial sword, and so like a big. Ice is a massive sword, two-handed. It could be used as an executioner's sword. It could be turned into two smaller swords, which is what we see happen when Tywin orders it melted down and recast. So, could it have been used by a giant? The previous one, perhaps. I just don't think we've got any evidence for that one way or the other. So, yeah, I mean, it's a nice theory, but I don't think I can back that one up particularly. Let's go to Auntie Slayer saying, "Hi, Robert. I hope you're well. I am. Thank you. My question is about Darkstar. Involving himself in Ariane's plot seemed to only work against him, since he left that situation worsening his standing with all the parties involved. It seems like the door has been left open for his story to head in many different directions. What do you think his motives and contribution to the future plot are?" Okay, so Darkstar he's a book only character. He wasn't in the show. And he kind of appears on the scene when, in A Feast for Crows, we suddenly get this expansion of the story out to get a whole load of Dornish plotline. And Ariane has this plan. She's going to put Princess Marcella onto the throne. And this is a way that she's going to be getting vengeance on the Lannisters. And she's one of many people who's frustrated with Doran. She thinks he's being too slow, too ponderous. So she gathers together a few allies, one of whom is Darkstar, and they get rumbled. They get stopped, and Arya Hotar, who's Doran's right-hand man, personal bodyguard, he comes in and basically stops the plot. Darkstar, however, attacks. Ariane's just there about going to say, "Okay, we're all done here. I get it. It's a fair cop. You figured me out. I'll go back and see what my father says." But Darkstar attacks Princess Marcella. Now, he doesn't kill her. He scratches her, cuts her ear, and then gets chased off across the sand. And that's pretty much the last we see of him. Now, why did he do that? It's the clue is what he said earlier, which is that, as far as he's concerned, if the idea is to cause a war, prompt a war between the Lannisters and Dorne, which seems to be what Ariane was wanting, you can do that rather than just let's put Marcella in as a new queen. You could just kill Marcella, and the Lannisters would be so angry they'll just come and attack anyway. So if you want to prompt a war, you just do that. And it seems that he just got this rush of blood to the head and thought, well, why don't I just go with my plan? Clearly Ariane's plan's not working. Let's go with mine. I'll just kill her now, and then we'll get a war. But he fails, and he gets chased off. Now, what next for him? Yeah, basically, where could he go? I mean, we don't have a huge amount of clues. We don't have POV from his perspective. He only really appears like in a chapter or two. There's not much going on there. He seems charismatic and not a very nice character. But what we do know is that he's jealous of Arthur Dayne and Arthur Dayne's status as Sword of the Morning. He talks about this. I think the implication is that he might go and claim it for himself. Dawn, the Sword of Dawn. So if he does, he won't be able to immediately come back into Dornish polite society. He would have to have protection from someone else. So it makes sense that if he's done that, that he then goes to try and get in with the new king, Aegon the Sixth, Aegon, and if he got onto his Kingsguard, then that would certainly leave him in a place where the Dornish can't come after him. So that seems the most likely way. I mean, you're right. He's literally just ridden off into the desert. He could go anywhere. He could do anything, but we only have his previous statements and apparent motivations to go on. And from that, I think we have to conclude that he's going to want to try and get the Sword of Dawn. Let's go to Rassler saying, "Good day, Robert. Where do you think Ned Dayne has gone? Is he still in the Riverlands? And now that George has removed the time jump, that would have aged him up and replaced him with Darkstar. Do you think Ned will play any future role in the story?" Yeah. So this is we've talked about the time jump a few times before. The original plan, George R. R. Martin's original plan, was to have a 5-year time jump. Uh, sort of roughly before A Feast for Crows / A Dance with Dragons. And the idea is that a lot of, and you can see the way he kind of set this up, a lot of the characters have gone to places where they could conceivably be for 5 years. Arya is in Bravos. Sam's heading down to Old Town. John takes over at the Wall. Who else have we got? Sansa in the Eyrie. Bran has gone up to learn to be a tree wizard. A lot of these characters have gone to places that they could conceivably stay for 5 years. And George R. R. Martin's original idea was that he would therefore have this kind of 5-year break, and that would allow the main characters to all age up, because some of them are still very young. So Bran started the story aged 6, I think. We need to get out of our minds the teenage Bran that we see on the TV show. He's still a child here. But George R. R. Martin was going to age everybody up, and also it would allow Dany's dragons to age up so that they would be big enough to be ridden and part of an invasion. And eventually he abandoned that idea. And the reason he gave for that was that whereas he could see all of the characters I've already mentioned, he could see them all stopping somewhere for 5 years, and he could conceivably do little sort of catch-ups of them thinking about what in the first chapter of the new book, them thinking about what they've been doing for the previous 5 years. He, however, could not conceive some characters. He mentioned Cersei in particular. He could not conceive of just kind of sitting around for 5 years and not doing anything. And he didn't like the idea of just telling a huge amount of story just looking backwards. You would have the first large chunk of the next book just looking back at what happened. And he didn't like that. I think he did try it a little bit and it didn't work for him. So he abandoned the 5-year time gap. What that meant was a number of things. One of the examples which is used most is the fact that he introduced some new characters, like Darkstar, who would take over the roles of that younger characters might have taken on later. So Ned Stark, Edric Stark, who is he's now the Lord, actually, of Lord Dayne. But he was the squire to Beric Dondarrion in the Brotherhood Without Banners, and stayed with the Brotherhood Without Banners until the moment that Lady Stoneheart took over, and then he and a few others left. They didn't like the direction she was taking it in, and so they left. So the question is, where's he going? Now, his main story arc would have been becoming Darkstar, basically. Now, what does that mean? Does he just now disappear from the story? Pardon me. I don't think necessarily. I don't think he's going to be as big or important a character. He's certainly not a POV character. I think we will probably see him head back home. He's in the Riverlands, and he was there as squire to Beric Dondarrion, and Beric's now dead, properly dead. What does he do? The Brotherhood Without Banners has dissipated. The most logical thing for him to do is head back. So I think he will be in Starfall when Darkstar tries to take Dawn. That's my instinct, and maybe he will feel honor bound to try and stop Darkstar in some way. Beyond that, that's when George R. R. Martin's Gardener writer takes over. Would he survive that? If he did, would he sort of follow this into King's Landing, keep on trying to get it back? We'd have to wait and see where George's muse took him on that. Rassler saying, Arthur Dayne is spoken of very highly by multiple characters as being an honourable man. But was he really the great man people say, as he stood by and let Eris II abuse his wife? Is he being looked at with rose-tinted glasses? A bit, I think, yes. So he is definitely a great fighter. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Everybody thinks that, even characters who are themselves great fighters like Jaime Sir Barristan rate him as an incredibly powerful and strong fighter. So that bit, I think, is true. Is he a good person? Well, I think he certainly had to be of a certain, and we don't know the exact criteria for what allows you to be chosen as Sword of the Morning, but he certainly must be of a certain level, so to speak, in order to be named as Sword of the Morning. But his honor code may not be one that we completely agree with. This is what we see from Eris II's Kingsguard is their loyalty to their vows. And we see this from a number of different perspectives. It comes through in the fever dream to Ned. It comes through in a weirwood dream that Jaime has. It comes through in those thoughts that those two have outside of those dreams, and what we see from Sir Barristan. We get lots of this kind of evidence that they held as the most important thing their vow to defend the king. So that's what made them honourable in their own sight. Whether we agree with that, I think, is something George R. R. Martin wishes to challenge us with, because he took Jaime as the example of someone who got these kind of moral qualms about what's going on here. He saw what the Mad King was doing and about to do, and so he killed him. And he was vilified by everyone for it. Kingslayer, Oathbreaker. He really hated. His reputation is horrible across the Seven Kingdoms. And the clear implication is that because the rest of the Kingsguard would never have done that. So do we look at him through rose-tinted spectacles? Perhaps a little bit, but his honor code was so much about protecting the king that everything else seems to have kind of faded away beneath that. So I've got one more question from my patrons. And after that, I will go into the chat. So now is a good time to drop any more questions into the chat. Adam Geets saying, hi, Robert and Dan. General, a Song of Ice and Fire question. I recently heard a theory about Jaime's hand that Qyburn has. Do you think that hand could be used in the future of the story? For example, it comes alive as a result of experiments and it strangles Cersei. That will fulfill the prophecy. So in terms of fulfilling prophecy, I think you're talking about the Valonqar prophecy, where the Valonqar will wrap his hands around your throat, and throttle her and kill her. And a lot of people have speculated, including me, that this could be Jaime. Have wondered whether or not that works with the fact that he's just got a gold hand. Can you wrap a gold hand around someone's throat? That's open to your language interpretation, I guess. And so some people have tried to get around this by saying, well, yeah, Jamie does still have a hand. We think that Qyburn's got it. Jamie had it around his neck all the time. So it's rotted by this stage. It's decomposing. He had it there for weeks. So might Qyburn have turned it into, like, is it Thing from the Addams Family? The hand that sort of goes around. Might he have done that? Well, it's not beyond his capabilities, I'm sure about that. Whether he therefore did do it, though, is another matter. I don't think it is the way that we get around this prophecy. Personally, I think that you can, if you've got this rather grisly thought process, but I think if you have a gold hand and another hand, you can put your hands around someone's neck. I don't think that that's beyond sort of linguistic possibility. So I don't think it's needed. And might it happen? It could. But I think Qyburn's attention is more going to be on bringing people back from the dead, so to speak, like with Robert Strong. That's where it is. We focus a huge amount on this idea of Robert Strong, Zombie Mountain, as being like, so here's this undead science white. He's a prototype by Qyburn. There will be more to follow, maybe even better. But this isn't just a one-off. If he's got the ability and time, he will make more. Okay, let's have a quick look through the chat. Let's go to Simon Schaffner saying, if you had to make one specific guess, what will the role of House Dayne and Dawn be in the rest of the story? On one hand, they seem important. On the other hand, they clearly aren't main characters. I think you were going to put that on, by the looks of it, you were going to put it on Patreon, but didn't get a chance to. So, I mean, I'd kind of wrap that up with questions I've done already. My general take is their main role has happened. But what is left now is the sword. And I think the sword will be important. I think that there's every chance that the sword is Lightbringer, Dawn, Lightbringer. That's when light comes, isn't it? Dawn. So it kind of all works together. The sword of the morning, Lightbringer. I think John will end up getting that sword, although perhaps other potential candidates could do it. And I think there's a medium chance that if George R. Martin does go down the route of John killing Daenerys, which he might, that is the sword that John does it with. I don't think it's likely to be this kind of like a dagger and we're just crying and can't say a thing. That the way that it happened on the TV show, I don't think it would work like that. Having this sword do it perhaps is quite poetic in a kind of a twisted echo of the Nissa Nissa story. Quick flick through. Auntie Slayer saying, thanking the mods. Absolutely. Always love to thank the mods. Northern Tommy saying, hands of gold are always cold. They absolutely are. Reflective rambling, thinking about the logistics of golden hands and throttling. Yeah, thank you. And Auntie Slayer saying, I love House Dayne's words that are rarely mentioned, fallen and reborn. Do we think this is foreshadowing or based on information we already know? I mean, I I go with the idea that their house words are something like "we bring the dawn" or something along those lines. Somebody mentioned that earlier. That it seems the most likely one. George R. Martin has said that the house words are spoilery, so yeah, I don't think Fallen and Reborn, perhaps, but I think yeah, it's to do with the sword, basically. Let's see. Have I got any more questions? I think that's all my super chats done. I think that's all my Patreon questions. And Kristamir Rakov asking, did I like Arthur Dayne's portrayal in the Game of Thrones TV series? Well, while it lasted, yeah, I guess. But it struck me as one of the things the TV show did do was they tried to, where they'd taken out a bit of story, they tried to do a little kind of nod, a hat tip, Easter egg there for the fans to say, well, we know we've taken this out and we're not including it, but just so you know, here's the thing. And so the inclusion of Arthur Dayne, and particularly the sword Dawn, they lingered for a second longer than was necessary on the sword Dawn being rested there. If you remember the Tower of Joy flashback, it got sort of leant against the end of the bed. So that was a thing. I quite like that. If you're not going to get into House Dayne, and I kind of understood why they didn't, then at least showing us Dawn is good. Okay, I think with that, I will start drawing this one to a close, Dave. So we've got House Dayne we've done. Next week, let's do another House. Probably let's do House Martell. While we're in Dawn, we'll go and look at House Martell, and then after that, perhaps we'll look at Dawn as a whole more broadly. In terms of other videos coming out, I've got my normal 2 or 3 videos on the main channel. The Well Told Tale, if you've not come across it, it's another channel I have where I audio narrates the best sort of fantasy science fiction stories ever. We've got an H.G. Wells classic, The First Men in the Moon, that we're working our way through at the moment. So that is happening each week. Do go and check that out. And I think that is all for now. I will be back same time next week, and we're going to be looking at House Martell. So if you are watching this back later, appearing somewhere around here is going to be a link to other live streams if you'd like to watch them. Appearing somewhere around here is a link to my Patreon page, which is the best way to support this channel if you wish to do so. Thank you, patrons. Thank you, moderators. Thank you, everyone in the chat. Actually, big hello if you are watching over there on X, on Twitter. I know that a lot of people do. I take my questions here over on YouTube, but I know you're there and I value you. Thank you very much. Take care, everyone, and I'll see you same time next week.